Smello smelly people, you all smell wonderful today. It's good to smell you. That sounds creepy. Soz. Welcome to another episode of Making Sense Makes Sense, the podcast that's all about demystifying the wonderful world of fragrance in a way that is fun, accessible, and devoid of BS. We're here to un-gatekeep fragrance, give it to the masses, and say, enjoy. That's the mission. I am Thomas Dunkley, I am your host, and like you, I smell. I love scent, and I want to spend my life talking about it, which is why you are all having to suffer yet another almost middle-aged man with a podcast. Not soz. Hey, I forgot to tell you something last week. Making Sense Makes Sense has been shortlisted in the Best Audio category in this year's Jasmine Awards. If you don't know the Jasmine Awards, they're kind of a big deal. They're like the Oscars or the BAFTAs of the fragrance writer-creator world. They're run by the Fragrance Foundation. I have 6 Jasmine Awards already. Hold for applause. Thank you kindly. So it's a thrill to have 7 nominations across 4 categories this year, with this podcast included. Okay, I'll stop being smug now. Anyway, Making Sense Makes Sense is shortlisted for our episode all about functional fragrance with the delightful Ed and Andy from ACT London. That's such a fun episode, so do go back to season 1 to listen if you haven't already. Okay, enough about me, on to today's guest. My guest today is Liz Moores, perfumer and founder of Papillon Artisan Perfumes. With Papillon, Liz has created something quite remarkable and beautiful, a collection of personal and evocative fragrances that reflect her world around her, telling the most rich and complex stories. She's a one-of-a-kind talent, a self-taught perfumer with an innate ability to transport you into worlds unknown. She's also an absolute hoot, so this is a really fun and almost a little bit emotional interview. So let's hop straight into it after a very brief word from our sponsors. This episode of Making Sense Makes Sense is sponsored by Carium. Walking into a perfume store can sometimes be an overwhelming and intimidating experience, with enthusiastic sales staff and a huge amount of choice. Or at least it used to be, because Carium are looking to disrupt and change how we explore fragrances in store. Carium represents the future of fragrance discovery, blending technology, creativity, and emotion. It makes finding a fragrance feel like a personal journey, not a sales pitch, which is why I'm pleased to have joined them as a brand ambassador. Carium have partnered with 2 iconic London stores to make discovering fragrance an easy and interactive experience. The technology made its UK debut in June 2025 with an exclusive partnership with Thameen London, showcased in a Selfridges London pop-up. It's now a permanent feature at the Thameen counter, and customers can explore key fragrances in the range using Carium, the scent sommelier. But the Carium technology has been developed to work in all fragrance settings and launched last year at Parfum La Danse in Richmond, a boutique founded by acclaimed perfume critic Derya Turkan. Here, customers can explore a finely curated selection of fragrances across multiple niche brands, with Carium's innovative AI tech, powered by a large language model, guiding them in their discovery. You can find Carium's The Scent Sommelier in both stores, so why not pay a visit and let Carium help you discover your next favourite fragrance. Liz, it is such a pleasure to have you on Making Sense Make Sense. I feel like I've spoken with you at different points in my career. Back when I was writing for the Candy Perfume Boy, I think we had you on Fume Chat back in the day. So it's so nice to kind of catch up with you again many, many years down the road.
It's lovely, Thomas. I love chatting with you. It's been a long time.
It has been. And I know that you are someone with a really unique perspective in the industry. And I want to talk to you a lot about what you do, how you do it, why you do it. But I know that you're someone who's always been really interested in fragrance and smell. And I wonder, do you know what your earliest olfactory memory is?
Yeah, I think that would be marigolds along my grandmother's pathway. And I didn't like the smell at all. I thought it was absolutely disgusting, but I was quite intrigued by this disgusting smell. And I remember that. I remember very much being at my grandparents' house, my grandfather making porridge for my brother and I very early in the morning, and that smell of slightly singed milk on the gas stove. So I think for most of us, I think fragrance can often start as a comfort, isn't it? There's something very comforting about scent, where we find our early connections and the things that make us feel safe. And when it comes to fragrance, I've always been attracted to a pretty bottle, Thomas. So I think that's where that's where that started.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit of a magpie, I think, there, yeah. And I think there's something really fascinating about strange, unsettling, uncomfortable, and, disgusting smells. There's something in that, isn't it? There's something very primal about that they stick in the memory.
Definitely. And I think, and somebody asked me a question, sort of one of my non-perfume friends, and she was asking why I stick all these disgusting things in my fragrances. If you're talking about, like synthetic civet and castoreum and hyraceum. And she said, well, and I was talking about the historical aspects of this and, how these materials were used hundreds of years ago. And she said, but why? And I said, you know what? I said, it's one of those things that we're all sort of wondering. And I said, but I've often thought that it must have been such a smelly world anyway, before people were bathing regularly, that maybe these animalic smells were just smelling more familiar. They were smelling sweeter. They were smelling brighter in a world that was probably really, really rotten in every regard. But for me, I've always been attracted to animalic smells that make you uncomfortable. And I think it is that pushing the limits a little bit as well, mentally, being able to overcome things that are a little bit challenging. So for me, those are the materials that hold a great appeal, and especially in a fragrance.
Yeah, and you're sort of known for your filth a little bit, aren't you, Liz, in your fragrances? Because you do like sort of a bit of oomph and va-va-voom in your sense. And I think you might be onto something there, because I think we often talk about these animalic materials being really prevalent because they were there to be strong, to cover up body odors when people weren't bathing. But I wonder if it was also because they worked better with the natural smell, and also because they were more in context. They seem a little bit jarring in isolation now because we are so clean that they seem out of context.
Yeah, I do think that there's a real allure to a fragrance that has that human quality. And we say human when actually you think many of these materials come from animal sources, and so I do think it is that. I think there is something very, very primal about it. And maybe it's that human connection. Maybe it's the thing that bonds us all. And we do live in a very sanitized world. Everything is clean and it's scrubbed and it's polished and it's bleached. And I spend a lot of time outside in nature. I have horses, so I'm very used to stinky smells. I wonder if I'm kind of anosmic to a lot of the stink around me. I spend a lot of time in woodland, and you can often wander over there and smell, a rotting cadaver. There's animals, that have dropped down dead, badgers, deer. And I find it fascinating. I find there's a real pull towards things that make you slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, because also when we're in an industry where we want to make everything very pleasant and attractive, and I think sometimes to have that push pull of attraction and repulsion is exciting, isn't it?
Definitely, and I think it's like seeing, a beautiful face with a scar, or it's the thing that makes it human. It just comes back to that all the time, and if you're talking about an intimate setting, I don't think anybody in that moment is thinking, oh, I better apply some fragrance. It is about being with a lover and really engaging in the moment, as opposed to how you might smell, whether your eau de cologne is wafting correctly. And I think there is also that fantasy part as well. And with an animalic fragrance, and I just love the way that it changes, that it can change a fragrance so much and give you so many different aspects, that it can change from moment to moment. So it's almost like a living thing on the skin. I like that.
I love that. And I also love about how very predictably for any conversation that we have, we got into filth within the first 5 minutes. Well done us
Oh,
for
we're
that.
good at
That's
this.
great. That's where we expected this to go. Do you, we've talked about the kind of olfactory memories that you had that were early and that you kind of really stand out to you. But also, I know you are a lifelong lover of perfume.
Mm.
Can you remember which one was your gateway drug, the one that made you say, "Oh, perfume is for me"?
Okay. Well, probably again, growing up, I think sort of looking at pretty bottles on my mother's dressing table, my grandmother's dressing table, and I think pretty much most of us have done that. And I think so. Initially, pretty bottles, and I again pinching my mum's fragrance. I'm not sure I was really smelling that fragrance and thinking, "Oh, I love this. This is wonderful." For me, it was the 80s that created the gateway drug. So back in the 80s, I wore Obsession by Calvin Klein, and I wore a lot of it. And so I think for me, it was that sort of stepping into the next sort of chapter of my life, moving towards adulthood. I would have been a teenager back in the 80s. So wanting to be a bit more grown up, again, very heavily influenced by the fragrances of the time, which were all massive. We're talking the era of Poison and Giorgio Beverly Hills and the like. And so I think Obsession for me was the biggie, that big, spicy amber bomb that was Obsession. And at that point, I wore perfume all the time. After that, I don't think I've had a moment in my life where it hasn't been punctuated by fragrance in some shape or form.
Yeah, I mean, what a fragrance to start with. It still smells good. I have a
Mm.
bottle. I mean, obviously it'll have changed since then, but it's what strikes me as interesting about Obsession is it's actually surprisingly green amongst all that amber and that warmth and that vanilla. There's this really sharp leafiness, and I think it's just a really, really beautifully fascinating fragrance. And I suppose like knowing your fragrances, I can see how that may have informed your taste in a way because you are about your ambers and your resins and your deep, witchy, wonderful things that you like.
Thank you, darling. Well, I think as well, if you smell Obsession, maybe next to a fragrance, sort of similar genre, let's say Opium, let's go vintage Opium. I mean, they're literally, it's like night and day. Obsession is almost comes across like an eau de toilette. And you spray vintage Opium, and my goodness, it's nuclear. And you're right. I think Obsession has probably a degree of more wearability in a way because it does have those green facets, and there's a lightness to the heaviness, which sounds absolutely bizarre. Um, but I have a bottle. I bought a vintage bottle off of eBay, not that last year, I think it was, and I was really surprised at how tame it seemed.
Mm.
Certainly next to vintage Opium.
Yeah, it's quite still quite a loud fragrance, but it's quite affable. I would say it's
Yeah,
it's pleasant and it's inviting.
yeah,
So obsession was the one that started your obsession, pun fully
yeah.
intended there. But you obviously you didn't start out as a perfumer. I know you've done many different things throughout your career. What
Yeah.
was the kind of the turning point for you that one where you thought I can change, I can move away from just loving perfume to actually creating it? What was that journey like?
Yeah, I mean, I had a business with my ex-husband that was really sort of unglamorous, relatively boring. And I'd stepped back from that business somewhat while I was having our children. And I decided when him and I split up that I no longer wanted to be part of it. And I retrained at that point as a massage therapist, and I did anatomy and physiology, and I spent a couple of years doing that. And after that, that's what I did. I did massage, and I learned a bit about essential oils, and I enjoyed what I was doing. Didn't love it. I mean, I was very interested in it, very interested in the learning side of it. I didn't love it. It took up a lot of my time, a lot of my evenings. So I had a lot of clients, throughout the day and then sometimes the evening. And I had young children at the time. And it all sounds very, very boring. And I knew I always had a fragrance in me. So I loved fragrance and I had essential oils. So I did have a little bit of a go at mixing some essential oils together and making a whole big fat mess. And it wasn't a fragrance. And that was the point that got me thinking, how is fragrance made? Where can I find it? Why does nobody talk about this? This isn't putting essential oils in a bottle. And I think that was the point for me where I suddenly thought, I need to find out. I need to find out how this is done, not with a view to anything long term. I wasn't thinking of a business. I just wanted to know. And it didn't matter where I looked, what libraries I went to, nobody really spoke about this subject. The closest I could get to was books on natural perfumery. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's it. And I had a go, based on some of the little demo formulas. And I still wasn't getting close to anything that I would consider a finished fragrance. So at that point, I decided to do a bit of a U-turn with my career, and I did a 5-day natural perfume making course with the late Alec Lawless. And again, it was great. It was very informative, and it was very good for me because Alec had a very, very broad knowledge of absolutes, essential oils. He allowed us to do comparisons of, an essential oil, say rose oil from France, as opposed to Bulgaria, as opposed to Egypt, and how differently that all of these were smelling. So for me, that was fascinating. And that opened the door to me knowing this was something I really wanted to do. So at the moment, we're still hobby stage, but I was absolutely, completely absorbed in this world. And obviously, I have a lot of fragrance and had been buying a lot of fragrance, for myself over the years. So I had quite a large collection, lots of them vintage. And again, I know we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, but I said to you about the quote that a friend of mine gave me, which was, comparison is the thief of joy. And I remember smelling some of my early trials that I'd been, bunging together and smelling them against fragrances that I had in my personal collection. These are classic fragrances, famous fragrances. Who knows what I was thinking in my head, but all I kept thinking is, why doesn't mine smell like this? And again, a huge degree of naivety here. When I was on Alec's course, I met Karen Gilbert. And Karen had previously worked for IFF, and we became friends. So when I finished the course, I kept in touch with Karen, and she said, "Oh, are you still having a go at making your fragrance?" Because she knew that I wanted to make a fragrance for me. I thought, no, I'm going to make my fragrance. This is going to save me a fortune because I can just wear this signature fragrance all the time that I've made. And I said to her, well, we're not getting very far with this. It's rubbish. It's muddy and it's not doing this. And she said, you need to use aroma chemicals. You need some aroma. And I was like, what's that? What even is that? So then I go down another rabbit hole and it takes me off in another direction. And I did buy some aroma chemicals. I did a lot of research into it first, a lot of study. And in about 2 years, I think it took, I had Anubis. And I'd finished that fragrance and it didn't have a name, but I was really happy with it. And I thought, that's it. This is my signature fragrance. All these other fragrances now, they're all going to be redundant. And the rest, as they say, Thomas, is history.
It is history, and it's really, really beautiful history. And it's so amazing because I think what you've done is you've taken the time, and I think that's one of the key things is that, perfumery is an art form, it's a science, it's all, it's all different things. You've really taken your time to hone it as a craft for you. And I think that really, really shows in your work. And one of the things that I was saying to you is, before we started recording, and which is why we thought, oh, let's press record because we're actually having a very good conversation. Is that you really love the classics. This is something I know about you. You're a big Guerlain girly like me,
Yeah.
and I've always seen the fragrances you create as being creating in a classic style. You're one of the few houses out there that's creating in a very classic style of, say, the like 1920s and 30s and 40s Guerlain. And to me, they feel like those very opulent scents of the past, but made in a modern context. They are contemporary also in a way. And I feel like you really fill a niche there for people who love the vintage things. And the problem with vintage juice is it smells a bit, like vinegar at times, doesn't it? Because it's all gone off lots of the time. So you're kind of you're taking a style and really sort of making it modern. Would you agree with that, first of all? And is it intentional on your part to be sort of creating in that way?
I think it's definitely subconscious, but I also think, when I said to you about comparing some of the slurry that I was creating and looking at my beautiful fragrance collection, I quite clearly in my head thought, why doesn't it smell more like those fragrances? What's going on with those fragrances that I can't capture in mine? And so, I think I most definitely have been influenced by the classics, and also to a degree my own personal taste. I always said that I would, and I don't mean this. This sounds really egotistical, and I don't mean it like this. I always said I wouldn't release a fragrance that I would never personally wear. And that's not to say that I'm here editing it, going, well, I'm not wearing that, so nobody else is. I have a really broad range in terms of fragrance taste. I like pretty much we were talking about this, weren't we, about gourmands earlier. But I'm actually a bit of a secret gourmand lover and didn't know this. And so I think my fragrance taste is very broad. I'm very open-minded. I don't just instantly dismiss something and say, oh no, that's rubbish because it doesn't fit in with, what I find appealing. And so on that basis, the editing that I do is only edited in a way to ensure that I've done my very, very best with a fragrance, because I'm so damn fussy. Bit like whether it's, the food I'm eating or, the clothes I'm wearing. And I think because I like to be a bit selective in that respect, everything that I create has to be something that I would be comfortable wearing. And I wouldn't after an hour go, God, I can't stand this. This is driving me up the wall. So I mean it more from that place, as opposed to, I'm going to be the final word. I think it's just my way of explaining that I edit a lot with the fragrances because I want to do a really good job. I want them to stand up to the classic fragrances that I admire, and modern fragrances that I admire. So I think that's the hardest part, because I do work in isolation and I don't send my fragrances off to focus groups. And sometimes I will send them out to, friends in the industry like yourself and, let them have, an early sniff. But I think that so everything is shoved under friends and family's noses, because actually they're really good people to test this on, because they're not in the industry. They are coming from a very, very different perspective. So I find that really helpful. I find it really helpful to have those people outside of the industry smelling it and saying to me, what the hell are you doing, Liz? Normally when they do that, I think I've done something right.
Yeah. that's the rebel in you, I think. That's like, okay, I'm pushing the right buttons there. I think you create in a unique way, I think, and that leads to a unique olfactory perspective, which is why I think your fragrances really resonate with people, because you aren't doing what anyone else is doing. So it does create a unique voice. And I was actually looking before we were starting to record today, I was looking back at the last time I think I interviewed you, which was back on the Candy Perfume Boy, back when I had that blog. And it was the year after you launched Papillon, I think.
Yeah.
which would now be about at least 10 years ago, because I think it was about 10 years. Your 10-year anniversary was last year, was it?
No, Papillon will be 13 this June.
Gosh. So,
13
so
years, yeah.
yeah. So back then you were just about to launch your fourth perfume, which was Salome,
Yeah.
and you now have 10. So how would
Yeah.
you say your approach to perfumery has changed in that time?
Well, I think in many ways it's still very much the same. Obviously, there's always an eye on regulations. Sometimes it's like trying to hit a moving target because things can change overnight. Sometimes that can be frustrating, but I think if you've always got it in the back of your mind, it's there, so you can make allowances for it when you're writing a formula. I'd say my approach is still very much the same. It's very much it will always be creative for me. I give my the brief happens when it happens, and that all sounds really, really airy fairy. But I don't sit there with a sort of 3-year sort of projected plan and forecast of what the brand's going to be doing, and we need to fill a gap here, and we don't have a vanilla fragrance, so let's do that. It is very much, I love to get into my arty, slightly hysterical persona when I'm creating a fragrance. And so with so many of them, so Salome, we briefly chatted about that. I think between Salome and Anubis, they were the fragrances that really pushed Papillon forward, and brought it more into the sort of public domain. And I knew that Anubis might be tricky for some, but I mean, I smell Anubis and I find it very easygoing, and but this is me, Thomas.
But you're not a normal person. Let's be
I'm
real.
not normal. I'm quite odd. So
To
for
you,
me,
Salome smells aquatic and clean. To you,
well, I do remember that fragrance and when I was creating it, and I remember Simon, my other half, saying to me, well, what are you creating? What is it? And I said, oh, it's going to be really sexy, and it's going to, smell like sort of, hour after you've been romping with your lover, and it's, it's going to be hot, and it's going to, and he said, really? And I said, no, it's going to be good. It'll be good if I can nail this. And I remember him smelling it, and he just looked at me and he said, no. He said, seriously. He said, you've come this far. He said, the first 3 fragrances have been really well received. Almost like, what are you doing? And in a way, Salome, and I can tell you about this, I mean, I always knew I had a filthy fragrance. I've got loads more filthy fragrances in me, but I have to kind of restrain from that because I don't want everyone thinking that's all she does. With Liz, it's just a filthy fragrance. So I have to rein myself in a little bit. But Salome was a bit of a response to a lot of what was going on online in the fragrance world and on forums. And everyone was, lots of people were lamenting the loss of the big animalic vintage style fragrances. And there was part of me that thought, do we look back historically and see it through different eyes? Do these people that are talking about this really want this? Because some of those fragrances for modern noses would be very challenging, So in a way, it was a little bit of a throwing down the gauntlet for me when I was reading all these sort of topics about the loss of the animalics and the loss of this. So I thought, what? I wonder if I could do one, and I wonder how far I could push this to make people just a little bit uncomfortable. Do you really want to wear this? Are you going to be in it for the long haul? And Salome was the response. And it's very easy to find inspiration, for a fragrance like Salome, because we're all animals at the end of the day, and so it was a very easy one to get creative with, and so I think with the other fragrances, sort of moving on from that, I just really rely on my own inspiration. It could be anything, Thomas, and it's never one thing. I'm never sitting there thinking I need to create a fragrance to fill a gap. And I think the day I do that will be the day I stop, because it stops being creative and it stops being art. And I will always, always, always maintain that fragrance is art.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you most importantly have a really big told you so moment with Simon around that, to say, because Salome found its people. The people wanted the filth. You gave them the filth, and they were happy with the filth. Did you rub that in his face? I hope you did.
Of course I did. Of
yeah,
course.
Good.
And it still makes him laugh. It still makes him laugh. But I realised it was a gamble. I knew that.
Yes.
But
you've got to take a risk, haven't you?
Yeah. And I thought people are either going to smell this and go, it is the most disgusting fragrance I've ever smelled, or there will be people that will smell it and will go, oh, goodness, that's quite interesting. And I think sometimes, it's really good to have, those conversations. Fragrance is a fascinating subject to talk about because we know it's so subjective. And I love it, and I love the discourse it can bring as well. And because then people people talk, don't they? And I love that. Some great debates over fragrance. What's good, what's bad.
Yeah, but in terms of what changed for you, obviously the creative process is the same as it always has been. But do you feel more comfortable and confident in your ability now?
No, I don't know whether that will ever come, Thomas. Honestly, and when I joked and said, I get into my sort of creative persona, and my creative persona, she's a nightmare.
She's a monster.
And she's brooding, and she's, she doesn't want to talk to anyone, and she needs to be on her own. And, I'm quite frankly ridiculous I'm exaggerating a little bit. But I am stepping very close to who I become, and so it's very much a process that I absorb myself in, and so I have to stay in that zone to be able to see the fragrance through to the very end. And sometimes I do pick up a fragrance, put it down, pick it up, put it down, because I simply don't have the time to be working on it full time. But I think, no, in terms of confidence, I am my biggest critic, and I always will be. And so there's still that imposter syndrome moment where I think, what am I doing? I don't know how to do that. But sometimes it's those moments. They're very helpful, and they're helpful because they teach you a way out of the dilemma. They help you through it. And don't get me wrong, there's times when I've been utterly defeated and put a fragrance away for months and months and thought, no, can't deal with that now. Can't deal with it. I don't know what's gone wrong. I'm not even going to think about it, because I think you have to be in the right headspace. Or for me, I certainly do. But no, I never think, oh, I've got this nailed down. I never think, oh, this is going to be easy. The next one's going to be easy. I'll have that knocked out in no time. I do not do that. I'm terrible.
I'd like to meet this creative Liz. She sounds like she's absolutely bonkers in the best way.
She's awful.
You touched on just a few moments ago about the inspiration points for your fragrances, and this is what I really love about Papillon is it feels like an extension of you. All the perfumes feel really personal, and you live a really unique life, and this is one of the things that I think's helped really build your brand very organically. It's just people, they buy into you because you are interesting. You have loads of animals around you, you're very family focused, you live in sort of in a beautiful setting with woodland around you. And I just sort of wonder, you're taking inspiration, it's taking root from the people that you love, the animals that you love, and the places you love. Where do each of those ideas start for you? Because you love so many things. At what point do you go, oh, this thing that I love, that's a perfume?
Well, I think it has to come from scent as well. So I think if you in terms of my animals and my family and even the great outdoors, I spend a lot of time in those environments, and so I think I'm obviously very heavily influenced by the things around me, the people around me, creatures around me, smells that are around me, and so those things in themselves are very inspirational. For me, they are something where I think, goodness, wouldn't it be amazing to create a fragrance, that smelled like well, so Epona was, very much a nod to my late horse, who I lost a few years ago. And in a way, it's like bottling a memory for me. Maybe I wonder if again subconsciously there's something there where I'm trying to capture a moment in time, and I think Anubis did in a way capture that moment in time. Anubis captured, my first step towards creating fragrance and starting a brand. And so each of those fragrances, I think, is an attempt at me bottling something I'm thinking, whether or an emotion or a moment or a scene. And maybe that's what I'm doing. Maybe, actually, I'd never really thought about it before. Honestly, I'd never really thought, because it just happens. But yeah, I mean, when I look at the collection now in my mind, I know that they're all memories. They're all moments. And so, yeah, maybe that's what it is, Thomas.
Maybe, and what's quite
This is
beautiful
like
about
therapy.
that, yeah, it is. I do charge £200 an hour, just to let you know.
Oh, okay.
I'm a very good therapist, though. I have to say, I'm worth the money.
You are fantastic.
I think that's quite beautiful in a way, because you have these wonderful, rich, textured memories that you are bottling, but then you release them out into the world, and then they're no longer yours now, are they? Everyone that comes to them will bring their own, their own emotions and their own memories to what you create. Do you find that something that you enjoy about it, that it becomes something else?
Absolutely. And I think the moment whatever you do, the moment you put something out there for the rest of the world, doesn't belong to you anymore. And I love hearing from customers. I often get lots of really nice emails where they say, oh, I love this fragrance and it reminded me of this. And it will be something completely different to what was in my mind when I created it. But I think that's wonderful. That is the point, that we make our own memories then. We take, let's say in this instance, a fragrance, and we move forward with life. And all of the memories then are, and what you conjure from that fragrance, how it makes you feel, is yours. It's so personal. And I think that is lovely. So there's never been a moment where I thought, well, that's not what I had in mind. I love the way people talk about the fragrances and how it makes them feel, or what it makes them imagine, or where it transports them. That's the point. And that goes back to what we were saying, that I believe always that fragrance is art, but we're painting, with an olfactory canvas as opposed to a literal canvas. And, art is one of those subjects again, where the artist could paint something and mean one thing, but people looking at that piece of art will take something different from it. And I just love that, because I think it opens up all these doors for people to talk and discuss, and I love it. I think it's perfect.
It is wonderful. And also people go, and it's not just about what they bring to it from their own memories. It's they go and they create new memories in your perfumes. People wear your fragrances at their weddings. My husband wore Tobacco Rose at our wedding.
I know.
You create, they create new memories, good memories, bad memories, but those, your fragrances will become an invisible layer that's stored alongside those memories in our hard drives. And I think that's fascinating. And we talked a little bit about customer reactions, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, because these are bold perfumes, and you would quite gladly say that they're not for everybody. You won't love every single one in the collection, because they are bold. They all have a voice. They all have a point of view. There's a deep sense of history and romance and art in many of them, and I imagine that they probably could provoke some really interesting reactions for people. Are there any particular reactions that you've had from people trying your perfumes that stick out to you? I'm sure for Salome, it's probably people just, running in horror at times, but...
I do remember one of my daughters years ago, not long after Salome was released, sending me a review on one of the fragrance forums. And it was, I wish I could have found, if I'd known, I would have found it beforehand. because I think I kept the screenshot of it for years. And it was wonderful. And whoever had written this had written it really well. It was a really good piece of writing. And they could not understand this fragrance, or they hated it. It was, I can't remember. I do recall there was reference to sweaty ball sack. And I mean, it was so brilliantly written. And, but I mean, I was hoping, I was thinking, oh God, I hope they didn't buy a full bottle of this, because I feel really sorry for them if they have, because they're now stuck with it. So let's.
Yeah. Well, hey, they never said that sweaty ball sacks was a bad thing.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with it personally, but there you go. But ultimately, there was part of me that thought, God, my first thought was, I hope they haven't bought a bottle, because they're going to be, they're going to be really annoyed about this. But I quite like it. I quite like, in a way, that the fragrance can provoke this response, because actually, if you think about it, we could bring it right down and say it's only fragrance. You can wash it off. You can, but I love the fact that it's such a conversation piece, isn't it? And I love the discourse it can bring.
Yeah, and that's the point of art. Art is to create discourse and to provoke and evoke emotion and reaction and get a response from people. Just to let you know, what I do tend to do, Liz, is I do tend to almost try and take a quote from the episode to give it the title. So right now, currently in the lead for the running of the title of the episode is Sweaty Ball Sacks. I just want to put that out there for you. Just put that. It may not be. You might say something more fabulous as we go, but I just let you know at this point.
It's not going to get any better than that, Thomas.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing I really admire about your brand, about Papillon, is really it's the lack of gimmick and frills, and I really mean that as a compliment. Everything looks very beautiful. You've got gorgeous bottles, but they're very simple. And what you do is you don't present anything in a way that takes away from the olfactory experience. Was it really a conscious decision for you just to let the perfumes do the talking with it?
Yeah, and I mean, over the years, don't think for 1 minute that I haven't, sort of explored the potential to have a custom bottle, but I agree entirely with what you've just said. And is that's how I feel, that ultimately it's the fragrance inside. And we all love a fancy bottle, don't we? That's not to say the bottles won't have some little tweaks over the years, as and when we can afford to do it and, we feel it's necessary. But yes, I wanted it to be very simple. I wanted the packaging to be quite simple. Everything about it had to be about the fragrance. I hope I did that. But like I say, I'm a sucker for a fancy bottle. I love a bit of fancy packaging as well. But I just felt it needed to also be very cohesive. And I think because of how, especially as the brand has evolved, the fragrances are all very, very different. And so in my mind, to keep all of the packaging very uniform but have very, very different fragrances I quite like that. I quite like the juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I think there is an argument for, going out really fancy bottles, having a gimmick or an interesting kind of unique, USP for your brand. But I think also there's an argument for saying that it's quite distracting. I think one of the things that can be a real barrier for people is, as much as we love fancy bottles, but the more fancy and unique the bottle, the more likely you are to have people who go, oh, I don't like the bottle, so I'm not trying those. So actually almost to have something that is, beautifully simple, and I think it doesn't put people off, and it just allows people almost to have this sort of blank canvas that they go to and go, oh, okay, there's like a hidden treasure in here that I'm discovering.
Yeah, I think it's when the magic should happen when you spray the fragrance. That's where you should, and even though I am a sucker for a fancy bottle and fancy packaging, I love all that. I think it's beautiful. Those little attention to detail. But ultimately, I've been sent decants from friends in the perfume world, that are just in plain bottles, and it's irrelevant to me what they're housed in, because ultimately it's the fragrance. So yeah, I mean, I think it definitely was a conscious decision. It very was, and I just wanted to keep it very, very simple. And even when I released Hera, which is a pure parfum, I still, with Hera, wanted to keep the bottle uniform, wanted to keep it the same. And again, I think sometimes when there is that simplicity with the bottle, even with customers that we have that have all of the fragrances, they all look really lovely together. Yeah, because they're all very different hues as well. So the fragrance juice, all of them are different colours. So I still think it looks very appealing. I just didn't feel it needed loads of bells and whistles and lots of noise around the packaging and the bottles.
I can totally see that. And I think another thing that you do that's a little bit different that I'd like to ask your opinion on more generally is, we touched on it a little bit earlier, is you take your time. You're not going to, you don't have a set release schedule. You're not doing one a year. You're not doing one every 2 years. You're doing one when it's ready, when you have an idea, when you've worked on it, when you're happy. And I know, back in the day, we were talking about fragrances that you had worked on for a long time that you'd almost sort of got ready to launch and then decided not to launch. You really take your time with it. So not about you as much, but just thinking about the industry generally. I think last year they're saying there were between 8,000 and 10,000 fragrance launches last year. Do you think there is a need for slowing down a little bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at life itself, I mean, I've had some quite deep conversations with some close friends of mine. I think we're fully aware that we all live in unprecedented times. We have technology moving at lightning speed where we still haven't really caught up with a lot of it. And so I think the modern world is very much, I think, churn it out, gobble it up, spit it out, onto the next thing, onto the next thing. It seems to be this constant rinse, repeat cycle. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's up to each individual brand what they choose to do, how many fragrances they choose to release in a year. I just wonder whether it's as appealing, because I think you're still trying to get to know the previous fragrance, and then all of a sudden a new fragrance comes out from the brand. I certainly know I remember when I released Dryad. So Dryad is very green, chypre fragrance. It was a bit of a slow burn for a while, I think also coming off the back of Salome. I think Dryad probably seemed, very, very, very quiet and possibly a little bit apologetic, after old Big Gun Salome coming out. And I know that the sales were quite slow initially. Then Dryad had some really positive reviews from some respected fragrance writers. And so sales picked up a bit. And I think by year 2 of Dryad, it was selling really, really well. And then into now, had I have come off the back of Dryad, even in a year, and gone, right, well, now we've got another fragrance, and now we've got, I just wonder if it allows people enough time to really explore what you're doing. We've all only got so many hours in a day and so many days in a week, and so how much perfume do you need from one person? I certainly don't think anyone needs from me a release every 6 months, or even a release once a year. And it takes me, like I said, I'm a bit of a procrastinator. I'm my world's worst critic. So for me, I'm never going to be releasing a fragrance in a year, because at the end of that year, I'm going, right, okay, I think I'm nearly there, but I think we need another year where we wear it a bit more and we tweak it, and we might go back to the drawing board. So that's never going to happen for me anyway. So I mean, if by chance, the Papillon brand itself has hit on something that's great, that's the way to do it, is not release many. I don't know, because I think for maybe some people love it if the brand that they love is releasing lots and lots of fragrances. frequently, because it gives them something to look forward to. So again, I don't think I'm taking away from either experience, but it certainly is a very, very saturated market.
It's almost a bit, I feel like with you, it feels a bit like, when Adele goes away for like 6 years and comes out with an album, it's like that, because it almost feels like more of an event, because there are some brands. There was one brand last year, a really big brand, a great brand that I like and enjoy. 6 fragrances in 6 months they launched. And you think, it's hard, I think, for consumers to keep up with that. And also, it feels, I think, for me, just a little bit less special every time. And, sometimes you smell it in the fragrance, you go, this is fantastic. And actually, one of those 6 fragrances I really loved. I really, really loved. But I think for me, with a brand like yours, I mean, if someone were to say, "Oh, Liz is launching a new perfume," I'd be like, "I absolutely must try it," because it's something that I know is going to intrigue me, and it's like it is like Adele coming out with what's her next one? Will be about 35, won't it? I think what she'll be coming out with, but I think there is an argument for that, and I think it's there's no right or wrong, is there? It's just what's right for you, and this is what's right for Papillon.
Yeah.
I suppose just a quick follow up to that, because I know we've talked about your process, and you're your own worst critic, as you say. You take your time, you procrastinate. Is it the same every time? Do you know when it's ready every single time in the same way, or does it really, really different? How do you know when you're done? Because it's difficult, because you're not, it's not like you're a perfumer creating for a brand where you've got a team of creatives in the middle who are telling you that's done now, you've met my brief. You set the brief to yourself, you make the perfume, and I imagine there is a little bit of a temptation to keep going past the point at which it was done. So how do you know when you're done?
I think I know, because it's happened, where I'll reach a point where I think, yep, I think we're there. And then I think, oh, hang on a minute, should we just try one more thing? And then what happens is you move away from your original brief that you've set. And it's really difficult. I'd love to be able to sort of explain it to you in a really succinct and understandable way. I just know, and I don't mean that in some sort of woo-woo. I know where I'm going if I'm going to start making mistakes. I know when I'm going too off-piste with it, that I've lost the essence, excuse the pun, of where that fragrance was, what the starting point was, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sort of saying that quite badly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know the pitfalls. I know where my brain's going to take me, because I know it's taking me off in a different direction if things aren't going right with the fragrance, because I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be easier maybe to go down this route. And at that point, I know I've lost it, that I've got to regroup, go back to the beginning and start again.
Or start again, sometimes is it a case of just going back, I'll go back 2 months ago, actually no, I was right with that version I did earlier.
Yeah, I have
and I've
done
actually
that.
gone off. Yeah.
Or even just with one material where I've just fiddled around and thought, oh, maybe if I, amplified that a little bit, and that will be the tipping point where it's really, really bad. Often it often works, like that, where it goes really bad, as opposed to having those eureka moments where I go, oh, that was accidental. I did an overdose of this material and it became amazing. It's normally the first, not the latter. I'm normally saying, well, you've just really mucked that up now. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing is you have to, and again, you have to reach a point. People have asked me if I could go back and do a Nubis again, or do Tobacco Rose again, and how would I do them differently? I cannot think like that, and I can't. I know how the fragrances smell. I'm very, very familiar with them, and if I gave it too much thought of how I might do that a little bit differently, I would never love that fragrance again. And that was a moment in time. So, at the point at which I said Anubis was finished, and, the other fragrances and so on and so forth, I was satisfied then. So it sort of goes back again to what I was saying to you earlier, something I'd never thought about that bottling of a memory that I have at that moment. So I can't change it retrospectively. I can't go back and say, well, I would have done this differently.
And it sounds like it's really instinctive for you. You are, it's not woo woo, as you say. It's an instinctual thing. And as you grow and develop, and your skill and craft is honed, I suppose it becomes much more instinctive over time. Yeah. There's one fragrance I want to talk to you about in particular, and then you touched on it earlier, is Epona, because this was your last launch that came out in 2024, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a really beautiful leather. Now, I do not like leather perfumes, really. Well, that's a lie. I'm lying to you, actually. I used to not like leather perfumes, and then it was actually Tom Ford's ombre leather. I don't know if you've ever smelled that, but it's a really lovely sort of raspberry saffron leather, really interesting, that got me into leather. And I was like, do you know what? Actually, maybe I can be a leather daddy. Maybe that's something I could be. And obviously, that's been life-changing for me. But I think Epona is one of the most beautifully stunning leather fragrances I've ever smelled, and it has such a wonderful, gorgeous story behind it. So I wondered if you could share in a bit of detail, if you're happy to, about Epona.
I'll try and tell you without crying, because it was so my beloved horse. I had him for 24 years. And while he was alive, so I'd had him from when he was a 3-year-old. So I'll start at the beginning. So he was pretty much a baby when I got him. And I backed him and, got him going. And, he was a bit of a fool for many years. And I nearly lost my life a few times. But I adored this horse. I loved this horse. Honestly, he was just everything. If he was a man, he would have been the best husband in the world. And so he got older as the years passed by. We all get older. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have to retire you soon. I think you're getting a bit sore on the joints. And I always wanted to guarantee him a really long retirement. I didn't want to wait until he died in his field, or I had to get the vet out. And so I had to be really brutal with this. I had to go, right, we're going to do it now. And so he was about, how old was he? He was about 19, 20. He was a big horse, so big joints, a lot of wear and tear. And I knew it was our last ride. And it's such an emotional thing. And it was a beautiful summer evening. It was absolutely gorgeous. And if you've ever smelled a horse in the summer when they've got the sun on their skin and that slightly dusty quality to their coat, and the smell of really well used leather, so his old saddle that he'd had for years and years. And we went on our final ride together, and I remember taking the saddle off for the last time. I do get so emotional about this. Putting my nose on his flanks and thinking, I just want to bottle this, because this is just everything perfect, that these are so many memories that I've had. And so I did. So he went off and he had a great retirement, and a long retirement, actually. And I did think, Christ, this is the longest retirement anyone could have, but I was so happy that he had that all he had to do was stand around all day eating grass, getting fat. And but I thought, I'm going to bottle that moment. I have to bottle it. And I bottled it, and I came back. It took me a while, a little while doing it, and it was a couple of years sort of in the making. I got the first moth down almost day one. It wasn't a finished fragrance, but I was like, yes, there it is. That's the smell of him, and that's the smell of summer, and that's all those memories that I have. And I put it away, and Tracy, who was working with me at the time, she said, what's happened to the Perry perfume? Perry was his name. And I said, I will do it one day. I said, but I'm so busy at work and I'm not in my creative, funny brain. But I will do it one day. And I did. So I sat myself down and I got this fragrance finished. And then he died. And I was like, no way can I release that fragrance. That's one that's going in the drawer. It will never see the light of day. I couldn't even smell it without literally breaking my heart. And you're like, no, it's not going anywhere. So it stayed in a drawer. And I thought one day I might be able to smell it just to remind me of those days. But I knew I couldn't. I knew that emotionally I wasn't ready for it. And then I bought another horse, and, we kind of got together, had to get to know each other, and our early relationship was a bit sort of up and down. And then we really clicked, and he sort of filled a very big horse-shaped hole in my heart. And, I sort of fell in love all over again. And I thought, God, I've got loads of love in me. You're like, God, I love so huge. And at that point, we were about how many years on from Perry's death? About 5 years on from Perry's death. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it now. And I'm going to do it now because most of the time, I promise you, Thomas, I can talk about Perry without crying. But for a long time, I couldn't, a really long time. Every time, even if his name was mentioned, I would be in tears. And I thought, this is in a way, I want to honour him. That he existed, and also honour my other horses, the horses that have come before, been before and come after. And I just thought it was, for me, I just thought it was a really nice thing to do for my horse. Isn't that ridiculous?
It's not ridiculous.
It's a bloody horse. And, and so for me, it was such a personal memory. And I think lots of people ask me which fragrance is the most personal. And I think they're all personal in very, very different ways. But Epona is the most personal. And it's the most personal because it was born out of this absolute experience, the final ride on my beloved horse. And so, and I didn't know how it was going to be received because it's not like Salome. Salome is a big, floral, big indolic floral, absolutely massive. And, you've got all the other fragrances that are all sort of jostling for a certain position somewhere. And I thought, you know what, even if I don't sell much of this. It was one of those, actually, Thomas. It was the first time I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care if I sell lots of this. I want to say I did it. I want to say here is a fragrance that's like a bottled memory, absolutely in a bottle. And and again, it's not going to be for everyone. Not everyone wants to smell a bit horsey, a bit leathery, a little bit sweaty. But it was one that I'm really, really glad I released it, especially when I thought I wouldn't.
It's really beautiful. It's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. And I think I would encourage everybody to try that fragrance to kind of tap into the emotion behind it, because it is really, really beautiful. And I'd love to smell like horses' sweat and saddles, of course. Who wouldn't? Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. Yeah. But and you've made a bit of a sort of universe with that fragrance. It's so complex and interesting with the saddle soap accord and the violets. It's just a really fascinating, calm fragrance. I think there's a real serenity to it. I think it's beautiful. Yeah. And I would encourage everybody listening to try it. Before I let you go, Liz, I want to know, talked a lot about where you've come from and what you've done and kind of the greatest hits of Liz Mills and Papillon, but what are you working on now? Can you share anything about what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so we're going back to the dark side, Thomas.
Oh, yes.
So I do think, so if I look at maybe the last few, possibly, was certainly Epona, certainly Hera. I think they're more delicate in their approach. So what I'm working on at the moment, which has been a work in progress for a long time. So we're talking about, let's think of the best way to describe this. So we're thinking earth and roots and smoke and soil and animalics.
I mean, what a teaser that is. That'll be amazing. So everyone should look out for something earthy, animalic, and intriguing in the future.
Yeah, back to the dark side, back to my dark happy place. I don't think it will make release this year because it's
take your time.
Thank you, darling.
When you're ready, Adele, we'll be there. We'll be ready. Don't you worry about that. We'll be ready.
Thank you.
Liz, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and so lovely to be able to do a bit of a deep dive into your brain around how you work, because I think it is so unique, and I think that's why your perfumes resonate so well with people, because you're doing something that nobody else is doing. So thank you so much for joining me and for sharing all about your world.
Oh, thank you, Thomas. You are a great therapist. You had me crying at the end there.
I know. Great. I was thinking, brilliant. That's clicked for social, that one. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Of course, I would never, popularize your grief for social views.
Oh,
of course not.
no, it's always lovely talking to you. I miss you a lot, actually, and I'm so pleased you're back in the perfume world. You're back.
I love Liz. I'll say that again because I feel it so deeply. I love Liz. She is a beautiful person making beautiful things, and I love how she does it all so unpretentiously. She just makes what she feels when she feels, and in this moment of mass perfumery, I really think there's a place for her refreshing, slow perfumery. I love it. I love so many fragrances from her collection. My favourites are Tobacco Rose. That's Gomez, by the way. You can hear him, my little pug, making grumbly noises. Do you mind being quiet? I'm doing something here. Thanks. My favourites are Tobacco Rose, which my husband wore as his wedding scent, so that's really, really special to me. I also love Angelique, which is a beautifully soft and peachy mimosa iris, and also her latest, Epona, which smells beautifully like horses and leather and is so rich with emotion. Such a stunning piece of work, that one. Now, if you want to know more about Liz and her work, you can head over to the brand's website, which is papillonperfumery.co.uk. You can also follow Liz on Instagram at Papillon Artisan Perfumes. I'll put those details in the show notes for you. That's it for this week. I will be back next week with another exciting new episode where I'll be talking with the brand founder all about her blockbuster niche fragrances that cost less than £90 for 100ml. Do tune in for that. It is a fascinating chat. A massive thank you to Carium, our sponsor for this episode. I'm all about making fragrance and fragrance discovery more accessible, as you know, and Carium's innovative AI solution, the Scent Sommelier, offers an entirely new way to explore fragrance by translating scent into language. You can find out more at carium.com. As usual, I'm going to hand over to our guest to tell us the fragrance they have an emotional connection with. After all, fragrance is an emotional art form, and I think our episode today proves that. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can at Making Sense Make Sense, but for now, I'll leave Liz to have the final words. I'll see you next week.
A perfume I have an emotional connection with will always be Shalimar by Guerlain. It's punctuated just about every wonderful moment in my life, from early days of boys to having children to going out on wild evenings with girlfriends. It's the classic fragrance that's always going to be in my collection.